Francois.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I cheekily make another diary suggestion to the Prime Minister? If she could remain in the chamber for just a few moments after questions, she will hear my right honourable friend for Newbury introduce his Armed Forces Statute of Limitations Bill, which will provide protection to those brave service personnel who served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Like her, I too, and I'm sure the whole House, want to see the setting up of the Northern Ireland Executive. But would she agree with me, we cannot do that at the price of pandering to Sinn Féin and allowing a witch hunt for those people who served so bravely for so many years to uphold the rule of law?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to satisfy my honourable friend on the first point that he raised, but I can assure him I'm aware of the proposed legislation that my right honourable friend, the member from Newbury, is bringing forward. We all want to see a Northern Ireland Executive restored. We do recognise that this question of legacy issues is one that has been there throughout these discussions and continues in Northern Ireland. What I want to ensure is that any investigations that take place in the future take place in a fair and proportionate way, because our soldiers did save bravely, as my honourable friend said, in upholding the rule of law. But what is important is that we should never forget all those people who lost their lives at the hands of the terrorists in Northern Ireland. And it is important, as I say, that any investigations are conducted fairly and proportionately.
They're exercising their knee muscles, and there's no harm in that.
10-minute rule motion, Mr. Richard Benyon.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill that would create statutory limitations on court proceedings against current and former members of the armed forces for certain alleged offences committed during military operations or similar circumstances and for connected purposes. Everyone in this House, and particularly those of us who have served in the armed forces, want our armed forces to always be seen as the most professional in the world. This means we want them to abide by the strict codes of behaviour we impose on them, and in addition to abide by the international rules of war. In the Balkans, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in Northern Ireland, and elsewhere, we've asked our armed forces to operate in highly complex war-fighting scenarios. Almost to a man and a woman, they have acquitted themselves in the finest traditions of the three services. The reputation of this country and of our armed forces have been enhanced by their professionalism, by their restraint, by their compassion, and by their courage. However, there is a problem. Firstly, out of the Iraq conflict, there has emerged an industry where lawyers, sadly often dishonest lawyers, have used vast amounts of public money to attempt to bring cases against current and former members of the armed forces. If there was any truth in these cases, that would have been one thing. But the abject failure of the allegations to stick shows how vile and corrupted the process became. The government were right to close down the Iraq Historic Allegations Team. This organisation was processing over 3,000 cases, which gives an indication of the level of absurdity of some of those claims. And my understanding is that there were just 20 cases running at the time of IHAT's demise, and none of these are believed to be viable by prosecutors. My bill would bring an end to what has become known as lawfare. Never again would dreadful individuals like Phil Shiner be able to line their pockets or the pockets of their legal firms with vast amounts of public funds whilst pursuing our veterans into old age. My bill would set a statute of limitations beyond which it would be impossible to bring a case against any individual against whom an allegation was made for actions he or she took while serving on operations. I would argue that a period of 10 years would be the right period in which to legislate. Now, I fully accept there would have to be caveats and there'd have to be exceptions. My bill would define what we mean by operations. A decade gives plenty of time for legitimate cases to be brought forward where real wrongdoing occurs, and I suggest it's about the timescale after which evidential trails start to run cold. The House should be indebted to the work of the Defence Select Committee on this, under the leadership of my right honourable friend, the member for New Forest East, and the subcommittee that met under the leadership of my honourable friend for Plymouth Moorview. Their work has informed this bill. Mr. Speaker, later this month, in Belfast, a 78-year-old man will face charges including attempted murder.
Shameful.
Dennis Hutchings was an exemplary soldier who ended his career as a senior warrant officer. He has a severe heart condition and has only 11% kidney function. The allegations against him relate to an incident in 1974 when a patrol he was leading in Northern Ireland, at a time of intense terrorist activity, fired on an individual who was killed. In 1975, he was told that no action would be taken against him or any member of his patrol, and this was confirmed many years later with a similar message from the Director of Public Prosecutions. So what has changed? There is no new evidence being laid before the court. In fact, there's less evidence, as 2 of the 3 witnesses are dead. The firearms, the casings, the original file have been lost. But the Northern Ireland Director of Public Prosecutions claimed in January that new evidence had come to light. Many fear that we are seeing a form of retributive politics here. Extreme nationalist-leaning individuals within the Northern Ireland justice system have decided to reignite such investigations. The government have rightly said that there should be no bias in how such investigations are carried out. Unfortunately, there is already a bias. Of the 3,600 deaths in the Troubles, 90% were at the hands of terrorists. These were people who went out with the express intention of killing and maiming. The security forces went out with the express intention of saving lives. I spent most of my time in the fields and streets of Northern Ireland, most of my early 20s was spent there, protecting the lives of prison officers, of reservists, of police officers from being assassinated in or near their homes. So please, can we end this argument that there's some kind of equivalence between terrorists and the security forces? There is a limit of 2 years for any former terrorist found guilty after the Good Friday Agreement was signed. Many feel that the on-the-runs letters, which were part of the Good Friday Agreement, effectively give terrorists a statute of limitations. Over 300,000 people served on Op Banner in Northern Ireland between 1969 and 2007. Those of us that are still alive will testify to the complexity of that operation. Many of us, myself included, witnessed acts of extraordinary restraint and professionalism by young soldiers in the face of extraordinary provocation. And like most Op Banner veterans, I have been moved by the ability of community leaders and politicians to bury the enmities of the past and to enter government with those who have killed or ordered the killings of people they knew. And of course there are ongoing tensions in Northern Ireland. We all hope that these can be ironed out in the coming weeks and months. But in the main, what Northern Ireland has done in the last few years is so impressive. They are moving on. It's moving on from the horror of killings and maimings. Terrorists who would otherwise be in prison walk free under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. The person who slaughtered 7 members of my battalion's band while they were playing to tourists in Regent's Park is known to the authorities, but he is not pursued. So why is Dennis Hutchings being pursued? And why are we now facing the possibility of potentially many more veterans receiving the knock on the door? So my bill ends this nonsense. With Op Banner ending 10 years ago, so would all pursuits of veterans into old age by a flawed and some would argue deeply prejudicial judicial system. Absolutely. If you discuss this with any audience, you get a clear message that unites left and right, old and young, people who have a detailed knowledge of military matters and people who have none. They want to draw a line under the Troubles. For them, hounding the likes of Dennis Hutchings and others to the ends of their lives is abhorrent. For those who agree that these prosecutions and investigations are wrong, but disagree that this is the way forward, they have to answer some clear and resounding questions. What would they do to end this grotesque charade? Do we just put up with it and hope no one notices? Can we imagine any other country in the world doing this to our veterans? Do we really want to see people who should be appreciated for what they did, even revered, being taken from their homes, questioned and prosecuted for actions they took on our behalf in one of the most impossible campaigns of modern times, many decades ago? Mr. Speaker, it's time for this House to reflect the mood of the vast majority of people in society.
Order. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Mr. Speaker, Richard Drax, Emma Little-Pengelly, Dr. Julian Lewis, Johnny Mercer, Mrs. Madeline Moon, Jim Shannon, Bob Stewart, Leo Doherty, Kevin Jones, Sir Nicholas Soames, and James Gray. And myself.
And the whole country.
Mr. Richard Benyon.
Armed Forces Statute of Limitations Bill.
Second reading what day?
June the 15th, sir.
June the 15th, 2018. Thank you. Order. We now come to the first Opposition Day motion on Armed Forces.
So, you want to understand how something is made law in the UK? Well, a law first needs to be formatted into something called a bill. A bill is basically a law in draft. Then it's the tale of two houses. A bill can start off its journey in one of two places: the House of Commons, which is filled full of members of Parliament, and House of Lords, which is full of life peers, hereditary peers, party political peers, bishops, and basically people that have lived a lot. So, for whether a bill is starting in the House of Commons or the House of Lords, the first question it needs to ask itself is, does it have government support? Now, for the benefit of this video, we're going to start off our bill in the House of Commons because that's where most bills originate from. So, does your bill have government support? If the answer is yes, then you can sit back and relax, as the government has a lot more time than opposition parties and backbenchers to debate bills. These are usually called public bills. If not, then the bill will usually be called a private member's bill, and you'll have a much harder time about this because you've got to convince a lot more MPs from your own party and from other parties to try and sign up for your bill to get it debated in the House of Commons. Anyway, whether it's a private member's bill or a government bill, both of them proceed to the next stage, which is first reading. This is simply the bill is read out and ordered to be printed so that MPs can read what it says. No vote happens at this stage. The next stage is something called second reading. This is where MPs debate and amend, make it better in their eyes, and vote on whether the bills should proceed to the next stage. Most private members' bills don't make it past this stage because they don't have the government support that they need. And remember, the government has the most MPs in the House of Commons and therefore effectively controls what laws go through it. The next two stages are called committee stage and report stage. In the House of Commons, this is where a small group of MPs go into a small room and go through the bill line by line to see if it can be improved in any way. Once this process is complete, it then goes to report stage, which is when it goes back to the House of Commons so that MPs can discuss and vote on the amendments that the committee have thought of. Then usually straight after the report stage is third reading. This is the last stage in the House of Commons at this point in the bill's journey. This is where MPs will debate and then vote on the bill for the last time on whether they think the bill should go forward. So you think this might be the end of your bill's journey, as this can sometimes take months. Well, think again. It's next got to go to the House of Lords, and it's got to go through the whole process of first reading, second reading, committee stage and report stage all over again. Well, you think surely the bill has been made into law now? Well, not quite yet. See, if there are any amendments that the House of Lords make that the House of Commons hasn't voted on yet, then it has to go back to the House of Commons for them to rubber stamp them. This is called parliamentary ping pong, as the bill can be thrown back and forth between the House of Commons and the House of Lords before they agree. Surely now you think, well, both the House of Commons and the House of Lords had agreed, so surely it can be made into law now. We've got one last hurdle. You've got to get Queen Elizabeth II or whoever's on the throne to put their signature on the dotted line. Once you've got that, it's happy times. Your bill has been made into law. It then goes into this place, which is the Parliamentary Archives, and then it gets enforced by police and the judiciary, which are judges and lawyers.
Still to come, should amnesties form part of the solution of how we deal with the past? Brian Rowan has a special report in a couple of minutes. Do stay with us. The upcoming consultation on how to address Northern Ireland's past will invite responses on the controversial issues of a statute of limitations and amnesties. It means the consultation, expected to begin within weeks, will go beyond the structure agreed in the Stormont House negotiations almost 3 years ago. That structure, favoured by the government, includes a new historical investigations unit and a commission tasked with gathering information for families. Brian Rowan has this special report.
The only thing that some of the people I spoke to want is to get their loved one back. It's important, I think, whenever we talk about the past, to realise that for the people who are daily having to cope with loss, this is there now. It's there right now.
Having been nailed, as they would say, many of them, to different political walls over the last many, many years, here's a chance to do something which puts the needs and interests of those who suffered at the front of this, as a driver.
If we do not have a functioning assembly, it will still remain the responsibility of the two governments to implement it.
It's important to do it now because our political institutions are in crisis, and this is one of the factors that's causing the destabilisation. And it's important to do it now because we're seeing a transmission of trauma between different generations, and it's going to keep infecting our society unless it's sufficiently addressed.
If there's going to be a statute of limitations, that's an amnesty. It's an amnesty which will apply to all of the actors in the conflict, both state and non-state.
Think about being lost on a political roundabout, not knowing which direction to go. That's the story of our past. It began a decade ago with the Eames-Bradley process, talked its way into the Haas negotiations, then into Stormont House. And so it continues in this endless circle of time. And what's to happen next? There's to be another consultation.
This is the last chance, I think. We've been playing politics for this for too long.
The failure to address these issues is a problem for our society as a whole.
So this time it has to be something more than just another consultation. Already the waiting has been too long.
This is victims and survivors carrying the can for everybody.
I've been listening in on this conversation, hearing the thoughts of the Victims Commissioner Judith Thompson, the academics, professors Kieran McAvoy and Louise Mallender, and the artist Colin Davidson, who painted Silent Testimony. The highly acclaimed exhibition, visited by tens of thousands of people while in the Ulster Museum, and which will be displayed in the Clinton Centre in Enniskillen next year to mark the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement.
Really, there was nothing specific for people who'd suffered loss, and as the years went on after that, I realised that this massive section of our community was, in a sense, paying for everybody else's peace. And that, you know, where it was the possibility of new hope for most of us, there were thousands, a massive section of our community had to give up hope. This massive section of our community actually exists. It's here. Because obviously we're encouraged that there needs to be, in some ways we need to move on, which is an awful term whenever we're talking about this, but you know, that actually this is a massive section of our community where the people simply can't move on. And so I look at where we're at now, and I suppose I think you know, this is just such a critical phase. You know?
I mean, I agree, and I'd be interested in your reflections on this, Judith. I mean, we're about to have this consultation on legacy mechanisms to deal with the past. My own sense is that we've been playing politics with this for too long. What we need now is action, and what that action should look like should be legislation that sets up the structures that were promised in the Stormont House Agreement to give victims some form of closure, exactly what you're addressing the issues exactly as you're saying. And you know, I went, for example, last night to watch the No Stone Unturned film about Loughin Island. That's 20 years those families campaigned for some form of truth and justice. It's a film, it's a piece of art that has delivered more product in some ways than the criminal justice system.
Colin, I completely agree. I think the description you've just given of what the impact of this is on people who are harmed is perfect. Just completely illustrates it, as your paintings do, what this means for people who've been traumatised or injured or bereaved or harmed. And as you say, it's not a small group of people. It's 1 in 3 of the population in Northern Ireland. And the Good Friday Agreement is where it all started. And it nodded in the direction of victims and survivors. And it sort of said that we'd do something, and then it didn't. And then the Stormont House Agreement, as Kieran says, said, OK, this is what we can all sign up to doing. And all those people that you painted, broadly, what they want is somewhere in there. Different people want different things, but these proposals give choices and options.
I think the failure to do something affects all of us. I mean, we see the failure is felt most profoundly by the victims who in some cases have been waiting almost 50 years for their cases to be appropriately investigated. But we're also seeing that there is intergenerational transmission of trauma. So people who weren't alive during the conflict are suffering from the consequences. We've seen that paramilitaries are continuing to exist in our society, and in some cases are as large as they were during the conflict. We have all the related political instability. So the failure to address these issues is a problem for our society as a whole.
It's just not justifiable in any way that we can continue to push this down the road. And Kieran talked about playing politics. And what I hear from the people I work with is that they are really sick of being nailed to different people's political walls, when actually what they suffered, what they need to address that in terms of justice and accountability and recognition and repair, what they need is broadly shared. And most of them will find some of the options and choices they want in these measures.
Throughout all of the consulting and the talking and the negotiations of the past decade, the same measures keep emerging. A structure that includes historical investigations, a commission to gather information for families, an archive into which stories and experiences will be recorded and kept, a reconciliation element, and acknowledgement.
It begs the question as well what we as a society can actually do. You know, that actually we're talking from the political point of view here. And I wonder if, whenever it all boils down to it, if it's more important that we as a society acknowledge the wrongs that were done, but also acknowledge that this massive section of our community actually exists. I think sometimes we put that huge section of the community in and bulk it in with something called the past. In fact, it's very much the now. And So I do feel very strongly that from a societal point of view, we need to embrace this. And this can be done through film, through art, through any facet of the arts, and beyond that. It's better that we do something than just leave it up to someone else.
I've seen some discussion around that, well, we can't really go forward with this, we being the British government in this context, mirrored by the Irish government. We can't go forward in this unless the devolved assembly is put back. That's a smokescreen. That's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Absolutely.
The mechanisms that obviously they envisaged in the Stormont House Agreement assumed that the Assembly would be up and running, but at the end of the day the responsibilities are in the two sovereign governments here. So we need to be telling victims the truth about this. So even if the Assembly is not established, it's been established in law, in the Brexit case actually, that we don't need the legislative consent from the Assembly to do this. The responsibilities remain on the two sovereign governments. So the conversation needs to be honest with people.
Absolutely, and this legislation is more or less ready to roll. It's Westminster legislation anyway. There are elements that will need some oversight from, for example, the policing board. That's some considerable way down the line. What we need to do is start now. If this legislation doesn't reach the Assembly, it doesn't reach Westminster before the summer, next year we have Brexit legislation, which is going to absolutely swamp the legislative timetable. This is the last chance, and it needs to happen now, and we don't need an Assembly in place to do it.
The consultative group in the past was created in 2007. It's been a decade now since that process began. From that process, we've had a broad blueprint of what needs to be done. We've had the Haas process, we've had the Stormont House Agreement. That blueprint has remained broadly the same. There seems to be consensus that we need truth, we need acknowledgement, we need all these processes. The legal obligations on the UK aren't going anywhere. These things need, so that this isn't going to go away, and it needs, the longer it takes to address it, the increasing pain that's been caused to victims, the increasing destabilisation in our political system, it's time to address it now.
What's new and controversial about the upcoming consultation is that it will invite responses on those controversial questions of a statute of limitations and amnesties, thus going beyond what was set out in the Stormont House Agreement.
This discussion that the UK government have suggested, the consultation that's coming, they've made it explicit there's going to be a conversation about statute of limitations or amnesties. Is there any real difference between a statute of limitation and an amnesty?
Where a statute of limitation is used appropriately, then yes, there is a significant difference, because the statute of limitation does not foreclose the possibility of prosecution. Presently, there's very little detail about what is being proposed here, but if you look at the private members' bill that was proposed in the last couple of weeks, that suggests a 10-year limitation on the possibility of prosecutions after the crimes are committed. If that were to be enacted, that would, in fact, be an amnesty law, regardless of what terminology is used.
Obvious concerns. But the consultation will stress the government's view that the most effective way forward is in that Stormont House Agreement structure. 10 years after the talking began, are we arriving at some moment of decision? Those involved in this conversation certainly hope so.
I think we are ready as a society for this grown-up conversation, and that grown-up conversation doesn't mean that we're going to reach consensus, but what it means is we hear as many and as wide and as varied voices as we can, and then politicians take ownership and responsibility to take it forward in a good faith fashion.
This really is everybody, and those who served in the security forces are victims, are survivors, are people who have been harmed, and are people who are waiting for investigations, just like every other part of Northern Ireland.
It's the hardest thing, but actually, you know, I wonder if we strip it away from Protestant loss, Catholic loss, loss at the hands of this group or that group, and look at it as human loss, that we may be able to start to get away through this.
That special report from Brian.
A potential amnesty from prosecution for security force members who served in the Northern Ireland Troubles is to be floated by the government. The statute of limitations proposal has been inserted into a public consultation document on potential mechanisms for dealing with a toxic legacy of the Troubles. The move has angered Sinn Féin, which has accused the government of an act of bad faith. Here's what Gerry Adams said after meeting Prime Minister Theresa May yesterday.
We're very concerned that without due notice to us, or indeed we understand to the Irish government, that the consultation document which the British are going to bring forward about the Stormont House Agreement bill, and remember the Stormont House Agreement is what all of the parties, including the DUP, signed up to, particularly on the issue of legacy. But we understand there's now a new section which is about an amnesty for British Crown forces.
But the Ulster Unionist MLA Doug Beattie has said that a statute of limitations cannot and should not lead to a general amnesty that would include terrorists. He's with us now. Doug, good morning to you.
Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, good morning. And Jerry Kelly from Sinn Féin. Good morning to you, Jerry.
Morning, Stephen.
Good morning. So, your reaction to this, Jerry Kelly?
Well, I think Jerry Adams has said it. There was talk with the British government through a long period, right back to the Stormont House Agreement, in terms of preparing a bill for a consultation. At no time during that period was this issue raised by the British government, or did we get any warning that they were going to do this. They have simply grafted on a piece which essentially does mean, the statute of limitations does mean, an amnesty for the British, the state forces. And it runs entirely against the Good Friday Agreement and entirely against any spirit of trying to get the issue of legacy out. You said earlier, Sinn Féin were angry. I can tell you that the victims of state violence are extremely angry, and here they are getting another blow on top of the refusing to give over information for up to 45 years in inquests, all the people waiting for decades for some sort of truth, never mind the issue of justice.
What about the victims of IRA violence, Jerry?
Well, it's the same. The institutions were set up to deal with all of it. Sinn Féin's position from many, many years ago was a Truth Commission. We went through a number of negotiations, eventually at the Stormont House Agreement. What was agreed by all the parties, which included the UUP and the DUP, and all the other parties, was that we would have these institutions which could deal with all of the issues, including bringing forth truth and investigative processes in the HIU.
If we look at this, the NIO statement that they've sent to the Nolan Show, I'll read you a particular part of it, get your reaction. Here's what the NIO told the Nolan Show. They said, the government believes that the Stormont House Agreement proposals represent the best means of addressing Northern Ireland's past in ways that will be fair, balanced and proportionate. So that bit you'd be happy enough with. Because it isn't fair, balanced and proportionate.
Well,
hold on a moment. Here's the twist. However, we acknowledge that others have different views on the best way forward, such as those proposed by the House of Commons Defence Committee, which do not involve recourse to the criminal justice system. In the spirit of open and meaningful consultation, it is right that the government listens to all views. Now, when they say we acknowledge that others have different views on the best way forward, I wonder, are they talking about the DUP?
Well, I presume the DUP is heavily involved in this. As I understand it, Emma Pingelly and one other DUP signed up to a private members bill which reflects what we're talking about here. And Emma Pingelly was in the centre of the negotiations around the legacy over a number of years. So it is clearly a bad faith process both by the British government and the DUP.
Well,
let me also say this. You see, anybody can read into a consultation with any opinion they want. This is the British government grafting on to a bill which was already complete, a new section, which when you put it into a consultation paper like that, you're showing the intent of the British government. So that's the big danger in all of it.
But you can call it bad faith if you like, as can Sinn Féin. That's your prerogative. Here's the bottom line. If you don't have a government in Northern Ireland, and therefore the leverage of, well, look, if you do this, the government will fall apart. If you do this, we won't agree. How are you going to stop any of this?
Well, lots of people disagree in terms of that, but if you're talking about the talks issue, we have gone through a whole process of talks over a period of 10 months. And it was said very clearly to the British Prime Minister yesterday that, there's no point and no public confidence in going back into that hamster wheel, if you like, if there's not going to be meaningful talk.
But this is the DUP flexing the muscle that they have with the British government. And
you're absolutely correct, Stephen. It is, of course, flexing the muscles with the British.
Meanwhile, you're on the sidelines and can do nothing about it.
Well, we're not on the sidelines. You know, we are have a substantial mandate. We will use that mandate, and we will argue our case at every type of forum. There has been a call, and remember these issues that are in the talks, like the Irish Language Act, Marriage Equality, the Bill of Rights, and the Legacy Inquest funding issues, are all issues which are an obligation of the British government as well. They're not just down to the DUP. So the British government really are being wagged by the tail in terms of this. We have called for it at their governmental conference under the Good Friday Agreement, and both governments, in the circumstances we're in now, should be working at this. They should be bringing forward what is a substantial difference to the negotiations as it is now, instead of as it looks in terms of at least legacy, just rolling over to a DUP demand.
If we look at this, by the way, you've got to agree with the Stormont House Agreement, don't you? Because it was between you and Sinn Féin.
Well, we do agree with the Stormont House Agreement. So, I mean,
it was between you and the DUP, of course, I meant to say.
Well, one of the issues, and it's well you raise that, because it does raise a valid point. One of the issues about all of these talks, Stephen, was that what happened with the RHI and with the accusations of corruption, NAMA and all of that, what happened when Martin McGuinness stood down was because agreements had been made between parties in agreements, and then the DUP reneged on them. That's the difficulty. So it's not simply as, you know, here's another set of talks. This was about the implementation of agreements already made.
I'm looking at this House of Commons Defence Committee report, in which these legal experts are cited, Professor McAvoy, Professor Rowe, who say that any statute would need to apply to both state and non-state actors and would need to incorporate a truth recovery mechanism. Did you not know about any of this? Did you not know that any of this data, information, commentary was being collected?
Well, it's not the first time that stuff like this has been floated, but what we are dealing with now, certainly wasn't floated during the negotiations, but if you go way back to Peter Hain and all of that, you can see that it was attempted one time before to bring in legislation, again at the last minute, when no one was consulted in terms of that there, and the legislation failed at that point. But let's be very clear about it. Do we know what it means? Yes, we do know what it means. Amnesties, everybody said getting in and coming out the other end of this, including all the parties, including Doug's Beatty's party, and all the rest, said this should be victim-centred. What this is saying from unionism is that the only victims that count are the victims that are not were not killed.
Well, no, the point is that these legal experts are saying that an amnesty would have to, a statute of limitations, in other words, would have to apply to non-state actors as well as state actors.
And the families,
non-state actors.
I know, I'm listening to you. But the families right across the board, the victims' community, wherever they come from, are against it. That's the key. If we said we were doing this for the victims and survivors, then we should do it for the victims and survivors. And this is not doing that. This is taking one section of them and forgiving everything that the state's done.
Doug Beatty, listening to this, your reaction to this, Doug. Good morning to you. Ulster Unionist Party MLA, obviously.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think it's incredible that here we have Jerry Kelly, when he knows that his leader only in September said that jailing the IRA killer of Tom Oliver would be counterproductive, and now this fake outrage about something like this has been open source since April of this year, and you could quite easily go on and see it. In fact, the statement that you read out is an open statement which has been available since the 14th of this month. Can I maybe just give a little bit of context to this, Stephen, please, for a couple of moments? What actually happened was in April that the Defence Select Committee met to look about legacy issues and to try and address the imbalance that we have, where we have terrorists who are given shortened sentences, royal prerogatives of mercy, Jerry has one himself, and OTR letters, which Jerry has been the postman for. And they come up with a recommendation that we should look at a statute of limitations. And you're absolutely right. 2 law professors said that if you give a statute of limitation to state actors, it has to go to non-state actors. That means that they have recommended an amnesty. We cannot support any form of amnesty. Victims don't deserve an amnesty. There should not be an amnesty. And that's quite clear. If you break the law, you face the law. Be you a soldier, be you a policeman, be you a member of the public, be you a politician. So that's incredibly important. But let me just tell you something, Stephen. Here is a difficulty we have, and here is a bigger issue here that people need to understand. The HIU, which was agreed by the DUP and Sinn Féin, which we did not agree to, will investigate 1,600 killings only. And of those, they will reinvestigate every single killing by the state, not every killing by the terrorists. But they will not investigate people who have lost limbs, people who have got life-changing injuries. They will all be forgotten about. This is absolutely disgraceful. And if we're saying victim-centric, then it has to be victim-centric for all victims, not just a few. And those people whose lives have been absolutely ruined from the 70s because of bombs set off by the terrorists will not even get a look in the present proposals.